Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Chapter 6 of Book 2 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, he makes a very important qualification, particularly for those who get a little mixed up about the nature of virtue ethics and imagine that virtue ethics is merely about finding a mean in whatever sort of thing we're talking about that is a middle position, and automatically says that because you found the middle position in it that you've hit the virtue and that's therefore good, and so you've avoided excess and deficiency. Aristotle says that there are some things, some actions, and some emotions that by their very nature are bad, that they are morally defective, you could say. There is no way of taking them as such and making them into something good. So the way that he talks about it is very interesting. He says that some emotions and some actions do not admit of any sort of virtuous mean. And we'll look at which ones he's talking about first. He says that the very names of some of them imply evil or deficiency or badness in some sense. And I think that holds for our own moral vocabulary as well. The question then is, of course, whether we rightly classify an action as belonging to that class of morally deficient actions, how we rightly apply the names and concepts. But that's for a different time. Let's see what else he says. He says, well, with any of these things, it's not possible to go right with regard to them. So let's take one of the examples that he uses, adultery. He says, is it possible to commit adultery with the right woman, in this case, or right man, at the right time, in the right manner? And Aristotle says, no, because it's adultery. If you're violating the fidelity of the marriage bond, that's a problem no matter how you qualify it. And this is interesting because this is one of those things where Aristotle is not going to let somebody off by saying, well, I don't do it all the time. This is just this one time that I'm doing this. Aristotle says, even one time is bad. You shouldn't do it. Well, I'm doing it because my spouse doesn't give me what I need, or because that person is so lonely and I just want to comfort them. Nope, don't do it. Bad idea. It's a bad thing no matter how you pitch it, no matter how you twist your perspective so that you can try to see it as good. There is no possibility of construing it as a virtuous action, whether we talk about it in terms of an action showing virtue or an action in accordance with virtue. We have another video on that. He goes on and he says, you might as well suppose there could be a proper mean in excess and deficiency in acts of injustice or cowardice or prolificacy. For example, think about bribery and the way that some people think about bribes. By its very nature, bribery, there's something wrong with it, and that's revealed in the very name, Aristotle would say. Can you bribe somebody too much? Not enough? It's still bribery, no matter what you do. And similarly with all of these other things as well. So let's take a look at them. Let's take a look at actions first. So adultery, we already talked about. That's some sort of violation of fidelity. Interestingly, you notice that nearly every moral code around the world defines sexuality in some way that includes some sort of offense against a committed relationship. Most cultures, at least all the ones that we know about. Theft, another one that you're not supposed to engage in, klope in Greek, taking other people's things without their permission. There's a whole bunch of other things that could count as theft as well. And typically we look at theft as being an offense against justice, as perhaps adultery is as well. Murder, here the Greek term for that is androphonia, killing a person. Murder. Now you could say, well, wait a second, what about, battlefield courage? You're going out there and you're jabbing somebody else with your spear or your sword or swinging an axe at them. Well, there's a different description of that act. You're not just simply wandering around looking for people to kill. There were examples of people doing that back then and today. And, you could also do androphonia in the way that we talk about manslaughter by being stupid or being inattentive and doing things that put other people at risk. There is no good way to spin these. There is no right amount of these. It's not like you can say, well, look, I only killed 3 people. That's not that big of a deal because serial killers tend to kill more. No, you're killing people. Same thing with stealing. This is a justification people often give. I'm just having a little taste. I'm not really stealing. I'm just, skimming a little bit. No, you're stealing. And we can go on and on with that. Another really interesting aspect of this is when it comes to emotions. Aristotle thinks that there are certain emotional states that simply are not good, and they cannot be somehow redeemed, made good. They may be brought into a sort of a situation where societally we could use them to get certain things done that might conduce to some good, but in the person themselves, they're a bad thing. And it doesn't matter in certain respects how much of it you have or who you feel it towards, it's a bad thing. It's a worse thing, of course, if you have more of it. So the first one that he talks about, and here when he talks about being revealed in the very name, this is a great example. Epi hierarchakia literally means setting your hands to wickedness, setting your hands to badness, or setting your hands to vice, because kakia also means vice. When we talk about somebody being malicious in terms of their emotions, we mean that they have a motivation of doing bad things or harming people just for the sake of doing that. Not even necessarily to get anything tangible out of it, just to do it, to do it. Shamelessness, another example, lacking in shame or lacking in modesty. We're going to talk about this in another core concept video, the quasi-virtue of shame. Lacking shame whatsoever, just doing whatever, like walking around, for example, in our society with your finger up your nose, digging away, that would be an example of shamelessness. When we talk about somebody being a shameless self-promoter, being very slick and coming in and always trying to turn everything into a business opportunity, that would be an example of shamelessness as well. Perhaps when it comes to like sexual relations, we might, in our culture, although Aristotle didn't talk about that, talk about a certain kind of shamelessness. As, for example, when sexual partners make demands upon each other that really go beyond the bounds and are coming out of left field, and you're like, you want me to do what? And they don't seem to have any sort of problem or embarrassment about it. Perhaps that's what Aristotle's talking about as shamelessness as well. And now notice the last one, envy, thonos. This is never good, according to Aristotle. There is no way to make envy into something good. Envy is aroused at the sight of goods that somebody else enjoys. But instead of being happy that they enjoy them, you feel pain because they're not yours. And Aristotle thinks that this is something fundamentally bad. So this is a sort of list of exceptions to the whole notion of the virtuous mean. Not because, Aristotle suddenly veers off into deontology or some other kind of ethics, but just because, look, these don't have a virtuous mean to them, so there's no way to somehow weave a virtue out of any of these.